My name is Edward Collins, and this is not an easy story to tell. It's about trust family and how quickly everything you love can be put at risk. One evening, I thought I was going to a family dinner to make peace with my son after a year of silence. Instead, I uncovered a betrayal that nearly cost me everything. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Here, we share stories of resilience and survival stories that remind us that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward. And don't forget to comment and let us know where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the night it all began. The bubbles clung to my hands, pale foam shimmering in the kitchen light as I scrubbed the same plate for the second time. It had become routine, my evenings ending with one plate, one fork, one cup. Ever since Linda passed, the silence in the house carried a weight I couldn't shake. I tried filling it with the television, with the hum of the refrigerator, with the shuffle of newspapers across the table, but nothing could replace her voice. The silence always won. The kitchen was full of memories I couldn't escape. The faded photographs still clung to the refrigerator door with old magnets that had lost their grip, yet I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. There was one of Michael at his high school graduation, all grins and boundless pride, Linda's arm wrapped around his shoulders. That photo was a relic of a time before the arguments, before money poisoned our conversations, before silence replaced love. I often stood in front of that picture staring at the boy who had once been my whole world. My evenings had a pattern, a simple meal, dishes washed, the radio turned low to a station Linda used to love. Sometimes I'd pour myself a small glass of bourbon, not for the taste, but for the ritual, as though I could trick myself into believing she might walk back into the room if I just kept everything the same. On that particular night, the loneliness felt sharper than usual, like a cold wind sneaking in through cracks I hadn't noticed before. I sat in my chair, her chair still opposite, untouched, and tried to lose myself in the evening paper. Then the phone rang. It startled me, not because the sound was loud, but because it was so rare these days. My hand hesitated before I reached for it, nerves twisting in my stomach, as if the call itself might reopen wounds I wasn't ready to face. I squinted at the caller ID, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, and felt my breath catch. The name on the screen was one I hadn't seen in a year, Michael. For a moment, I just stared. My thumb hovered over the green button my chest tight, memories of our last argument rushing back with cruel clarity. He had asked me for money too much, far too much, for some venture I didn't believe in. We shouted both stubborn in our own ways, and then he had left. That was the last time I'd heard his voice. The silence between us had stretched into months, then a year, until I almost convinced myself I didn't miss him. But seeing his name there glowing on the screen, I knew I had been lying to myself. I answered. His voice was hesitant, careful, the way it had been when he was a boy who'd broken something valuable. He said he missed me. He said he and Sophia wanted to see me again. He said they'd been wrong to let pride keep us apart. His words carried a kind of nervous sincerity that pulled at me no matter how much I tried to guard myself. Then he asked me to come for dinner. It felt sudden, rushed even, but in his tone, I recognized the child who once clung to my hand during thunderstorms, the teenager who still sought my approval after scoring a winning basket. It had been so long since I'd heard him speak, like that vulnerable open. Against my better judgment, I said yes. After hanging up, I sat in my chair with Linda's photograph in my lap, her smile frozen in time. She always believed families found their way back, no matter how broken. I tried to hear her voice in my head, urging me to give him another chance, reminding me that forgiveness wasn't weakness. For the first time in months, hope stirred inside me, fragile but real. I went upstairs to prepare. My bedroom was more a museum than a living space. Linda's perfume bottles still lined up on the dresser, the curtains she had chosen letting in soft light. I opened the closet and reached past my everyday shirts until I found the navy suit hanging in its plastic covering. Linda had insisted I buy it years ago for Michael's graduation. She had been right, of course, about how a man should always have something proper to wear for important occasions. That suit had walked me through job interviews, anniversaries, and her funeral. Tonight, it would have to walk me into reconciliation. As I dressed, I studied my reflection in the mirror. Age had not been kind. The lines around my eyes were deeper, silver streaks dominated my hair, and my shoulders had slumped in ways I hadn't noticed until now. Would Michael see me as I was, or only as the man he remembered, I brushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the chance to put the pieces of our family back together. From the cabinet, I selected a bottle of aged whiskey, something I had been saving. It seemed the right offering, a bridge between past hurts and future hope. My phone buzzed again with a text, the address in Montclair, New Jersey. I stared at the message, surprised. Montclair was no modest neighborhood. It was wealth and status a world far removed from my quiet life in Queens. I ordered an Uber, my hand trembling slightly as I typed the address. As I waited, I stood by the window, looking out at the familiar brownstones of my street. Mrs. Lopez from across the way waved at me, and I raised my hand in return. I wondered if she sensed as I did that tonight could change everything. The ride arrived, and I climbed into the back seat. The driver was friendly, making small talk about the weather, about traffic. I answered politely, but my thoughts were elsewhere. As the car rolled through Queens, then over bridges, then on to highways, I watched the landscape shift. Small shops gave way to suburbs, then suburbs gave way to sprawling estates. By the time we neared Montclair, my chest tightened with disbelief. These houses looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. When the car stopped in front of Michael's address, I froze. The mansion rose before me with stone columns, manicured lawns, a fountain that sparkled in the evening light. Two expensive cars sat proudly in the driveway, their polished bodies reflecting the glow of well-placed lights. This was wealth I hadn't known Michael possessed. I paid the driver, adding a generous tip out of old habit, and stepped out onto the pristine pavement. The air was crisp, the sky beginning to darken, and I felt the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. My shoes clicked against the stone path as I walked toward the enormous front door, my bottle of whiskey held like an anchor. Every step carried hope and unease. This was not the life I had imagined for my son. It was grander, richer, but also strange foreign. As I reached the door, I paused, whispering to Linda in my mind, "Help me tonight. Let me find him again." The door opened before I could knock. A woman I had never seen before stood at the threshold. She was middle-aged, her dark hair threaded with gray, her black dress crisp and plain. Something about her presence told me she was not family, but staff. She greeted me warmly, though her eyes carried something else, a flicker I couldn't place. It might have been concern, or maybe pity, but it passed so quickly, I almost doubted I had seen it. She stepped aside, gesturing me in. The moment I entered, the scale of it all nearly took my breath away. The foyer was vast, its marble floor polished to a mirror shine. A sweeping staircase curled upward with an elegance that felt cinematic. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, scattering warm light across oil paintings that looked as though they belonged in museums. The air smelled faintly of roses, not from a candle, but from enormous arrangements of fresh flowers placed with deliberate artistry. I felt out of place immediately, like a man walking into a world not meant for him. The woman introduced herself as Maria. She took my coat, gently folding it over her arm with practiced ease. She smiled again, though that fleeting expression in her eyes returned there and gone before I could name it. From deeper inside the house, I heard my son's voice. It echoed through the marble and the height of the ceiling, a little too loud, a little too eager. When he appeared, I nearly didn't recognize him. His suit was sharp-tailored in a way that spoke of expensive tastes. His hair was cut with precision, his teeth white and gleaming like those of a man who had invested in himself. He hugged me tightly, too tightly, the embrace lasting just a little longer than comfort allowed. Then came Sophia. She swept into the room like someone gliding down a runway, her silk dress catching the chandelier's light. She was beautiful, her makeup perfect, her jewelry understated but clearly valuable. She kissed my cheek as though we had been close, all along, her perfume enveloping me. Her smile was radiant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was rehearsed, the kind of smile practiced in mirrors. They both showered me with warmth, words of how glad they were to see me, how much they had missed me. I smiled back, but inside my thoughts churned. Where had all this wealth come from? Just a year ago, Michael had been begging for money to fund a venture I didn't believe in. Now here he stood, living in a mansion that seemed far beyond his reach. I told myself not to ruin the evening with questions. Tonight was supposed to be about reconciliation, about finding the son I had lost. I reminded myself of Linda's voice, her endless faith that families could mend if only given the chance. So I followed them deeper into the house, carrying my bottle of whiskey like a peace offering. The dining room appeared before us like something out of a glossy magazine. A long mahogany table gleamed beneath the glow of another chandelier, its surface laid with china so fine I was afraid to touch it. Silverware caught the light like tiny mirrors. Crystal glasses stood ready, waiting for the toast that would surely come. At the center of the table, candles flickered their flames, small but commanding against the expanse of polished wood. Everything was set for 4, though Maria remained in the background. I took my seat at what appeared to be the head of the table. Michael sat on my right, Sophia on my left, both of them positioned carefully, like actors in a play. The arrangement felt deliberate, though I tried to dismiss the thought. Maria served with quiet efficiency, bringing delicate appetizers that looked more like sculptures than food. She moved with grace, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she placed a plate in front of me. Again, that flicker of something I couldn't define crossed her features before she turned back to the kitchen. Michael reached for the whiskey almost as soon as I set it down. He handled the bottle with enthusiasm, pouring generous portions into the waiting glasses. He raised his tumbler high, his voice bright. Sophia lifted her wine glass with elegance, her smile wide. I followed suit, my own glass heavy in my hand. The toast was predictable but touching family forgiveness, the hope of new beginnings. Michael added Linda's name, saying she would have wanted us together like this. That sentiment struck me, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe it. The whiskey burned warmly in my chest, loosening the edges of my unease. Dinner began. The food was rich, carefully prepared. What struck me most was the taste. It was Linda's pot roast, almost identical down to the spices she favored. My fork froze halfway to my mouth as I realized. How had Sophia known? We had shared only a handful of meals over the years, none of them involving this particular dish. When I looked at her, she was already watching me, her expression one of deliberate kindness. She said she wanted tonight to feel special, to remind me that family always takes care of family. I smiled and told her it was perfect, though unease curled in my stomach. As the courses went on, the conversation shifted. At first, it was light, about memories, about how quickly time passed. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the questions changed. Sophia asked about my restaurants, how many were still running, what sort of profit margins we saw. Michael leaned in with inquiries about retirement succession planning, whether I had ever thought about putting things in writing for the future. I laughed it off at first, telling them I was still working, still strong. But the more I drank, the more their curiosity pressed in on me. It was as though every question carried weight, probing at weaknesses I hadn't realized I had shown. Still, I reminded myself not to overthink. They were young, ambitious. Maybe they simply wanted to know more about the business. Maybe this was their way of reconnecting. That's what I told myself as I lifted the glass again and again, though something about the warmth in my chest began to feel heavier than it should. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself it was the relief of finally being at the same table again. I told myself I wanted to believe in family. But when I looked at Maria standing silently at the edge of the room, I saw her hands tremble again. And this time, her eyes did not flicker away. They lingered on me, full of something I could no longer dismiss. The crystal glass felt heavier with each sip, though I told myself it was just fatigue. I hadn't been sleeping well these past months, and whiskey, no matter how fine, always struck me harder when I carried exhaustion in my bones. Still, I couldn't ignore how quickly the warmth spread through me, a fire that seemed out of proportion to the 2 glasses I had accepted. Sophia kept smiling at me, that fixed, radiant expression that could have been mistaken for genuine warmth, if not for the precision behind it. Every word she spoke was smooth, deliberate, rehearsed, like lines in a play. She complimented me on my appearance, on the legacy I had built through my restaurants. She asked about Linda with a kind of careful reverence, but her eyes were sharp, measuring my every response. Michael laughed too much. He filled silences quickly, as though afraid of letting me sit with my thoughts. He leaned close, often refilling my glass before I noticed it had emptied. His gestures seemed affectionate on the surface, but underneath there was an urgency that unsettled me. He wanted me relaxed, wanted me softened. I couldn't yet understand why, but I felt it in the pit of my stomach. The food came in careful order, course after course, like a symphony. Maria moved between the dining room and kitchen with quiet efficiency, her footsteps nearly soundless on the polished marble. She served soup in delicate porcelain, her hands unsteady as she set the bowl before me. I caught her eyes just briefly, and in them I saw a warning. She turned away quickly, but the look remained with me pressing against my chest. The bisque was rich, perfectly seasoned, almost decadent. I forced myself to eat, though each spoonful felt heavy, as though it carried more than flavor. I told myself not to be suspicious. After all, these were my family. My son, his wife. But something gnawed at me, a quiet instinct I had learned to trust during years in business. The instinct that told me when someone was hiding something. As the meal went on, the conversation circled back again and again to my work. Michael spoke of real estate ventures, vague in detail, but grand in scope. He brushed off specifics with laughter, redirecting the conversation to me. Sophia's questions sharpened, focused on numbers, ownership, legal arrangements. Did I have everything written down? Was there a plan for the restaurants if something happened to me? Did I have people I trusted to carry the business forward? At first, I answered lightly, trying to keep the mood easy. But the more they pressed, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't casual curiosity, it was focused, insistent. I could feel the weight behind their words, a calculation hidden beneath concern. The whiskey worked on me faster than it should have. My head felt lighter, my chest heavier. The room's glow seemed brighter than before, almost too bright. The chandelier's crystals sparkled with dizzying intensity, and when I blinked, the lights seemed to swim in the air. I steadied my hand against the table's polished edge, surprised by how much effort it took to keep my balance, even in my chair. I told myself it was nerves. After all, this was the first time in over a year I'd seen my son. Emotions ran high. That had to be it. But still, unease grew inside me. Michael leaned closer, his voice softer now, almost confidential. He spoke of family legacies, of responsibilities, of how men like me deserved rest after years of labor. His tone carried both admiration and persuasion. It was as though he was coaxing me, slowly leading me down a path I hadn't agreed to take. I remembered Linda's words, her faith in forgiveness, her endless hope that our son would find his way back. I clung to those words like a rope, trying to silence the doubts clawing at me. Surely this was what she had meant. Surely this was the chance she always believed would come. And yet across the table, Sophia's eyes flicked briefly toward Michael in a glance that carried more meaning than words ever could. It was quick, nearly invisible, but I caught it. A glance of confirmation, a glance of timing. My fork hovered above the plate, suddenly heavy in my hand. I thought of the mansion, of the luxury cars in the driveway, of the questions about my business. The story Michael had told me a year ago, desperate for money, begging me to believe in his venture, clashed violently with the life I saw around me now. It didn't add up. None of it added up. I reached for my glass again, more out of habit than desire, and for the first time I hesitated. The amber liquid swirled in the crystal, catching the chandelier's light in a dance of gold. I lifted it, then paused, lowering it again. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, distorted, tired, wary. Sophia noticed. She tilted her head just slightly, her smile tightening. Michael filled the silence quickly, his laughter loud, his stories bright. But beneath it, I felt the tension rising. Maria reappeared with the main course, and the smell nearly broke me. Pot roast. Not just any pot roast, Linda's. Down to the herbs, she favored the way she sliced the carrots, the particular gravy she swore by. The taste of home, the taste of her resurrected on a plate in front of me. My eyes burned before I could stop them. How had Sophia known Linda never wrote the recipe down? It was a memory passed only through years of practice, whispered to me when I asked. And yet here, it was replicated perfectly. I lifted a bite to my mouth, and the taste confirmed it. It was Linda's. For a moment, grief and longing overwhelmed me, memories rushing in like a tide. But even through the fog of nostalgia, suspicion sharpened. This was not coincidence. This was deliberate. Sophia leaned closer, her hand brushing mine, her voice soft as silk. She spoke of family, of loyalty, of how the past could be forgiven. Her touch was cool, her words warm, but her eyes betrayed calculation. Michael watched me carefully, too carefully. His smile strained his hand tapping against the table, his leg bouncing beneath it. He looked like a man waiting for something, like a gambler holding his breath as the dice rolled. The whiskey burned in my veins heavier than it should have, and the questions pressed harder. Retirement, succession documents, signatures. Each word another weight on my chest. Each glance between them another nail in a box I hadn't realized they were building around me. I told myself not to overthink. I told myself I wanted to believe. But when Maria dropped a fork in the kitchen and froze her shoulders tense, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. The room's warmth pressed in on me, heavier than the food, heavier than the drink. I dabbed my mouth with the napkin, pretending composure, though my stomach knotted tighter with each passing moment. Across the table, Michael's smile had begun to look painted on his teeth, too white in the golden chandelier light. Sophia's posture remained perfect, her back straight, her movements fluid, but her eyes flicked between me and her husband as though measuring my every breath. The whiskey glass in front of me glowed amber, untouched since the last refill. I had not lifted it again, not after noticing how quickly the dizziness had taken hold earlier. Instead, I let it sit shimmering with a beauty that masked its danger. I reached for my phone, almost unconsciously, intending only to check the time to anchor myself in something ordinary. The vibration startled me before I even touched it. A new message had appeared. I glanced at the screen beneath the napkin, shielding it instinctively, as if I were a schoolboy hiding notes in class. The number was unfamiliar, the digits strange, but local. The words were stark, written in all capitals, the kind that brooked no hesitation. "Get up and leave. Don't say a word to your son." My throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt, the chandelier's crystals swimming in dizzy arcs. I blinked, trying to steady myself, reading the words again to be sure. The same message, clear, urgent, no explanation, only command. My pulse thundered in my ears. My first instinct was disbelief. Who would send such a thing, and why? But deep inside, beneath denial, a part of me recognized the truth. The unease I had been dismissing, the tremor in Maria's hands, the way Sophia's smile never quite reached her eyes. This message only put words to what I already knew. I slipped the phone back into my pocket quickly, fingers trembling. When I lifted my head, both Michael and Sophia were watching me, their faces arranged in concern. "You look pale," Sophia said gently. Her tone was soft, but her eyes were sharp. "Is everything all right?" I forced a smile, though it felt brittle on my lips. "Just rich food," I murmured, maybe heavier than I'm used to. Michael leaned closer, his brow furrowed with exaggerated worry. "Do you want some water? You don't look yourself." "I'll be fine." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Just need to step away for a moment." I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the polished floor like a warning bell. My balance wavered, the room swaying just slightly, but I steadied myself against the table. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to obey the message without question, but I forced myself to move calmly, not to reveal the storm inside me. Michael gestured toward the hallway with a too-quick smile. "Bathroom's the second door on the left. Take your time. We'll wait here." I nodded, pretending gratitude, and turned toward the hallway. Each step felt heavy, my shoes clicking against the marble like a clock counting down. The hallway stretched long and elegant, lined with expensive artwork and soft lights. The second door on the left would indeed lead to the bathroom, but I didn't stop. Something beyond reason told me to keep going. The air cooled as I neared the back of the house, the scent of food replaced by the faint smell of cleaning supplies. Ahead, an archway opened into the kitchen. I slipped inside the room, vast and gleaming stainless steel appliances gleaming beneath recessed lights. Maria stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water as she washed crystal glasses. She didn't turn when I entered, though my footsteps must have been audible on the tile. She kept her gaze fixed on her work shoulders, tense. It was as if she had expected me, as if she knew why I had come. Beyond her at the far end of the kitchen, a door led outside, a back exit. Freedom, my breath caught in my chest. I hesitated, waiting for her to acknowledge me, to say something, but she did not. She only lowered one glass into the dish rack, her hands shaking slightly, then lifted another. The silence between us was deafening. I moved past her, slowly, expecting at any moment for her to stop me, to call out, to betray me to the others. But she didn't. Her shoulders stiffened as I drew near, yet she never turned, never spoke. Her silence was an answer, though not the kind I could explain. It was permission. The back door opened without a sound, spilling cool night air into the warmth of the kitchen. I stepped outside, the manicured lawn stretching before me under the glow of motion sensor lights. The grass was so neatly cut it felt unnatural, like carpet laid across the earth. My shoes slipped slightly on the dew, but I didn't stop. Ahead, a wooden gate marked the edge of the property, its hinges gleaming faintly under the streetlights beyond. Each step toward it felt like a battle, my heart hammering, my breath shallow. I expected a shout behind me, a hand grabbing my arm, but none came. The house remained silent, the night air filled only with the hum of crickets and the distant rush of traffic. At the gate, my fingers fumbled with the latch. For a moment, I feared it would stick, trapping me in that yard like a cornered animal, but it gave way with a soft click, swinging open onto a quiet suburban street. I slipped through, quickly closing it behind me as though sealing a coffin. On the other side, the neighborhood stretched wide and eerily still. Mansions loomed in neat rows, their perfect facades hiding secrets behind drawn curtains. The streetlights cast pools of pale glow on the pavement, empty of movement, empty of safety. I pulled out my phone again with trembling hands. My ride-sharing app opened almost by instinct, my fingers clumsy as I typed in a pickup 1 block away. The screen glowed back at me, driver arriving in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that felt like a lifetime. I stood on the corner, half hidden in shadow, the cool night pressing against my heated skin. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, my mind spinning. Who had sent the message? How had they known? And what exactly had I just escaped? The house loomed behind me, lit from within like a stage set, but to me it looked like a trap. My son's laughter, my daughter-in-law's smile, the food, the whiskey, all of it reassembled in my mind into something darker, something sinister. Headlights appeared down the block. Relief crashed over me as the Uber slowed to the curb, its lights cutting through the night like salvation. I climbed into the back seat, sinking against the fabric as though my body had been carrying a weight too heavy to hold. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his voice casual. "Good evening. Back to Queens." I knotted my throat too tight for words. As we pulled away from Montclair's manicured streets, my phone buzzed again. The same unfamiliar number. My hand shook as I answered. A voice came through low and steady, careful to remain neutral. "I hoped you would listen." "I hoped you would listen," the voice said as the Uber rolled from the hedges. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to the road. I stared at the phone. I asked who they were. The answer stayed closed, someone who had seen too much and could not sign their name to it. Then the sentence that split the evening in two: I had been in immediate danger at that table. I bristled at the drama. I wanted the softer explanation, nerves, grief-rich food. But the voice left no room for gentler stories. My son, they said, owed $2.5 million to people who collect with fists. Underground games, private rooms, sports bets. Losses layered on losses until the deadline crouched 12 days ahead. Streetlights combed the car in gold. The word debt unlocked small memories, Michael's swagger, his sudden silences, the way hope in his mouth always sounded like a shortcut. The whiskey I'd taken for comfort began to feel like evidence. Why warn me? I asked. Because the voice said tonight wasn't reconciliation, it was extraction. The bourbon you brought had been readied for you, laced with a compliance compound. It doesn't knock you out. It softens the edges, turns no into yes, and leaves the night fogged when morning asks what happened. With alcohol, it multiplies its reach. My fingertips found my temples. The chandelier's too bright shimmer, the sudden warmth, the ease with which I answered personal questions, everything arranged itself into an ugly pattern. The driver lowered the radio without asking. Documents were waiting in the house. The voice continued: a transfer of business assets, a durable power of attorney naming Michael, a letter to staff explaining my retirement, drafted in a passable imitation of my tone. All of it needing only a signature. They would have guided the pen-friendly hands under a tired wrist. I pictured my handwriting loops Linda used to tease and felt sick. In my mind, I saw keys exchanged, schedules, rewritten, the back office drawer where I kept her bracelet emptied by someone who never knew her name. "How do you know?" I said, and heard the strain. The pause told me the answer would be simple. Files left open, calls on speaker while assuming the help is deaf. A house where people are expected to be invisible. I couldn't look away, the voice said, and I saw Maria's shaking hands the way she never met my eyes. The driver glanced back. "You okay, sir?" "I will be," I said, which felt close enough to true. Advice followed, brisk and practical. Go home. Lock your door. Call your lawyer. Freeze accounts. Tell banks no wires without your voice. Change passwords. Warn your managers. Do not return alone. Do not accept a meeting in a public place. Each instruction shaved my life to its essential edges. Queens still felt far away. Beneath the anger, something steadier formed a plank to stand on. I thought of Michael at 6 Sticky with popsicle eyes bright as coins. How many small indulgences had taught him the shape of my surrender. Love can be a poorer teacher when it only says yes. "How did you get my number?" I asked. "On a contact sheet for tomorrow's calls, your accountant operations lead bank manager," the voice said. I copied it before anyone noticed. I imagined the list my life rendered as tasks, the future reduced to bullet points under a false signature. The voice warned me what would come next. Messages full of worry, explanations polished to a shine, an invitation to talk this out somewhere busy, as if witnesses could save me from a pen. Tears, perhaps. Tears warp a father's judgment like heat on plastic. "They will use the parts of you that are kind," the voice said. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded tired. We rose onto the highway. The city made its cold promise ahead. I folded forward, elbows to knees, the way I had the night Linda's pulse line steadied, then flattened. "Why help me?" I said again, because gratitude had nowhere else to land. "Because you said, please and thank you to someone no one looks at," they answered. I turned my face to the window until I could breathe evenly. Silence settled. The radio offered a weather report meant for people with uncomplicated nights. My phone vibrated with messages I didn't open. I took Linda's photo from my wallet, the one with her half smile that made waiters add extra cherries, and held it flat on my thigh. "Tell the truth," she used to say when I tried to negotiate with my conscience, even when it empties the room. The bridge shouldered up in front of us, cables humming the river, carrying the city's light like a rumor. Two paths laid themselves out painfully clear. I could go home, lock the door, barricade myself behind lawyers and the machinery of prevention. Or I could turn back while the ink was still dry and the bottle still half full, and place the right people between me and whatever waited behind that chandelier. "If you act," the voice said, as if hearing my thoughts, "do it with help." Then the line went dead, and I was left inside the ordinary sounds of an ordinary car tire's air, a hinge squeaking whenever we hit a seam in the road. The driver met my eyes in the mirror, softer now. "Keep heading to Queens?" he asked. I looked past him to the black water, to the grid of light stacked like a promise to the thin photo in my hand. Linda's smile was fearless and inconvenient. It always had been. I could feel a decision assembling itself bone by bone, the way weather gathers over open water long before the first drop hits the deck. "Drive on," I said, voice low. "I need a minute." The wind pressed across the bridge and made a sound like breath before speech, a long inhale before the truth finds its words. The bridge rose ahead, like a ribcage over the river cables humming. The city glittered, Montclair's ridge a dark line, and between them the night held its breath. The driver's hand stayed at 10 and 2, waiting for a destination I hadn't given. My phone pulsed with messages I refused to read. On my knee, Linda's photo steadied like a compass. Safety, I realized, is not always a locked door. If I went home and hid, the night would not end. It would only change rooms. Michael would try again, another dinner, a hospital bedside, a lawyer with pens already uncapped. Desperation has disguises and patience. Problems deferred are problems marinated. I told the driver to keep going and dialed 911. My voice sounded older but level. I reported an attempted poisoning, a planned asset transfer, a house in Montclair with documents likely prepared. I gave the street the number, the names, the facts that would survive any retelling. Whiskey refilled, a compliance drug described by an anonymous caller. Sudden dizziness out of proportion to what I drank. The dispatcher's questions were clean. Was I safe now? Was anyone injured? Could I identify the... Yes. She gave me a cross street and a time that fit inside my nerve. When the call ended, my hands had stopped shaking. I left a voicemail for my attorney, the one who guided Linda and me through expansion and grief. No signatures authorized, no transfers permitted, no wires without my voice. I texted my general managers, deposits sealed, early safes, recoded vendors, told to expect nothing new. It felt disloyal to guard the house against my son, but love without clarity is sentimentality with good lighting. Queens slid behind us. The bridge unwound. The driver offered water. I drank like a man relearning deliberate sips. We drove without radio. I counted breaths until anger cooled into resolve. By the time the suburbs returned, I could look at the situation without flinching. We reached the agreed corner, first a quiet intersection with hedges. An unmarked sedan idled in the maple shadow. Another slipped in behind us with lights off. Officers stepped out in plain jackets, voices low and exact. They treated me not like a scandal, but a report. I told the story once more sanding it down to the wood invitation opulence, the two perfect meal questions that dug at my future message that struck flint in my gut. The kitchen, the door, the lawn, the gate. They listened hard. One asked if I could re-enter sit again at that table stall without touching anything placed near my hand. He promised they would move when they had to, not before. Another gave me a test strip. If possible, swipe a rim and leave it plain. Evidence travels best when it can be carried. I nodded. It felt obscene to plan the choreography of my own child's arrest, but obscenity had already been served with the soup. They asked about the housekeeper. I said I believed she was the warning courage delivered quiet. They wrote her name carefully. Would Michael run? More likely he would gamble. We made a plan the way people lay a fire break. I would return apologetic, embarrassed by a spell, asking for water and a seat. I would feed the minutes with memories his birth weight. Linda's recipes, the first lease we signed, anything that kept their hands off pens and bottles. I would not drink. If I needed to steady myself, I'd glance at my phone. They would take that as a signal I remained in control. When they knocked, it would be with authority, not surprise. I paid the driver and asked him to wait around the corner. He studied my face the way strangers do when they recognize a moment they don't want in their own lives. He said he'd be there. I tucked cash into his palm like a promise. We glided the last block with our headlights drawing meek shapes across the asphalt. The fountain threw smooth water into the air as if wealth could be aerated. Windows glowed. Somewhere inside, plates were stacked, glasses reset, papers pushed out of sight. The night smelled of roses and chlorine and the metallic quickening of blood. At the curb, an officer touched my elbow and asked if I was sure. I was not sure of anything except necessity now. My years with Linda had taught me to distinguish pain worth bearing from pain that repeats. This I knew would hurt once. Running would hurt forever. I smoothed my jacket and checked my pockets for nothing but keys and phone. My fingers were steady. The old instinct to fix my hair rose and made me almost laugh. A father about to expose his son is still a father with habits. The walkway hushed under my shoes. The hedges kept their counsel. In the kitchen, a pan clinked. I pictured Maria's hand steadying on work. In the dining room, I imagined Michael tapping his fingers in that rhythm that meant he was counting outs. I imagined Sophia rehearsing her smile, choosing which expression the next minute would require. At the door, I did not pray. I remembered Linda placing a menu in my hands the first night we opened and saying, "Tell the truth on paper and in person, and we'll be fine." I pressed the bell. Its chime went through the house like a bright, thin blade. Behind me, engines softened and doors clicked. The night arranged itself around a single fact: I would not drink. I would not sign. I would not let kindness be rented by panic. I would sit and talk and wait, and when the knock came, it would be the clean sound of consequence, not revenge. A lock turned. The door began to open. I straightened my back and stepped into the light. Rick opened the door so quickly it was clear he had been waiting pacing. His smile was broad but shallow, a smile that cracked at the edges. Relief, suspicion, panic all fought for space in his expression. "Dad?" he said too brightly, stepping aside. "There you are. We were worried sick." I forced a rueful smile, the kind a man wears when embarrassed by his own weakness. "Needed air," I murmured. "Rich food." Sat heavy. I walked further than I planned. Sophia appeared behind him, silk dress wrinkled from anxious pacing. Her eyes darted, her hands twisting together before she smoothed them across her skirt. She reached for my arm as if to steady me, her touch a little too tight. "Jonathan, you scared us," she said. "Are you feeling better now?" "Much better." I let her guide me back inside, though every step felt like threading a needle. The foyer that had stunned me earlier now seemed gaudy, oppressive. Chandeliers, marble flowers, all of it masks pulled over something rotten. The dining room awaited reset. The plates stacked neatly, glasses polished, candles trimmed. A faint smell of whiskey lingered as though the room itself remembered. Papers that had once cluttered the mahogany had vanished. Evidence hidden, but not destroyed. They arranged themselves as before: Rick to my right, Sophia to my left. Maria moved in and out silently, her face carefully blank. Yet when she placed a fresh glass of water before me, her fingers lingered just long enough for me to feel the tremor. I sat, folded my hands, and summoned my calm. "If you don't mind," I said lightly, "I'd like to sit a while longer. This room feels warmer now." Rick nodded too quickly. His leg bounced beneath the table, his fingers tapping against the polished wood in that childhood rhythm. Sophia's smile was back in place, but tight-strained. She leaned forward. "Rich meals can do that. Next time, we'll plan something lighter." "Next time," I echoed, knowing there would be none. For a while, silence grew heavy and awkward. Then Rick rose, his voice booming too loud. "One more toast before the evening ends," he announced, moving toward the liquor cabinet. His back to me, I watched his shoulders tighten, his hands trembling as he poured. My glass received the heaviest measure, his own just a token. He carried the tumblers back, carefully setting mine before me with exaggerated care. The amber liquid swirled in the crystal. When the chandelier caught it, I saw what the anonymous voice had described: faint particles, suspended barely visible, swirling like guilty secrets. I lifted the glass, held it to the light, as though admiring the color. "Did I ever tell you about the day you were born, Rick?" He froze a moment, then forced a chuckle. "Dad, that's sweet, but let's toast first. This whiskey is too good to waste." "This is important," I said softly. 14 hours your mother labored, longest day of my life." Sophia laughed brittle. "Jonathan, can't we toast and talk at the same time?" "Patience," I said, swirling the glass so the sediment danced. "Some stories deserve to be told slowly." Their eyes sharpened. Sophia rose behind me, her hands settling on my shoulders, pressing with the weight of desperation disguised as affection. "You're such a wonderful storyteller. Why don't we honor Rick's birth with this drink?" Rick's voice strained. "Dad, just a sip." Then the story. I looked at the glass, then at them, and finally set it down untouched. "The thing about stubbornness," I said quietly, "is that it can be a virtue or a vice. Margaret always worried about which you'd choose." The silence in the room thickened. Maria moved in the kitchen, dishes clinking faintly, but her pace slowed, listening. Rick's face drained of color. Sophia's grip on my shoulders tightened. Before anyone could speak, 3 sharp knocks rang from the front door. Authoritative, final. "Police, open the door." The sound detonated in the air. Rick flinched, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble. Whiskey bled across the floor, sharp and unmistakable. Sophia's nails dug into my shoulder before she pulled away, her mask crumbling. "Stay here." Rick barked, panic flooding his face. He hurried toward the foyer, his movements jerky. Sophia followed, her heels clattering, her voice high and frantic. I remained seated, my untouched glass before me, sediment swirling lazily. My chest tightened, but not with fear. Relief, sharp and heavy. Footsteps, then voices. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed down the hall. A commanding officer's voice carried into the dining room. "Richard Collins, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Sophia's shrill protest pierced the air. "This is insane. It's a misunderstanding. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying." I rose, carrying my glass into the foyer. Officers stood in formation, professional and calm. Rick's arms were pulled behind him, wrists bound in cold steel. His face looked waxy, bloodless. "This is my father," he shouted, desperation breaking his voice. "Tell them, Dad. Tell them it's a mistake." I held the glass up, the particles catching the light. "There's no mistake," I said evenly. "This contains a compound that would have stripped my judgment and my memory. They wanted my signature tonight." One of the officers accepted the glass with gloved hands, lifting it toward the chandelier. The particles glimmered unmistakably. "Sir, attempted poisoning alone carries a heavy sentence," the officer said grimly. Rick sagged, his knees buckling. "You don't understand," he whispered loud enough for all to hear. "I didn't have a choice. The debt's the loan sharks. They'll kill me if I don't pay. 2 weeks. That's all I had." Sophia's voice cracked into hysteria. "Shut up, don't say another word." But Rick's panic drowned her. "They said they'd break my legs first?" He babbled, eyes wild. "Then worse. I needed his businesses, his money. I had no choice." I stared at him. My son, the boy Linda had carried 14 hours into the world. "You had choices," I said quietly. "And you chose this." The officers guided him toward the door. Sophia clawed at the table's edge, her eyes blazing with fear. One officer read her rights as well. She protested, claimed coercion, insisted she had been forced. But the papers waiting in their study, the careful meal, the complicit smile, truth outweighed her words. As the front door closed behind them, the mansion fell silent. The perfect facade cracked, leaving only echoes. Blue and red lights flashed against the marble painting, wealth in the colors of consequence. Maria stepped from the kitchen slowly, her face solemn, her eyes heavy. She did not speak, but the faintest nod passed between us. She had known. She had risked everything. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The air tasted different now, bitter but clean. I thought of Linda, then her voice like balm. Tell the truth even when it empties the room. Tonight, truth had emptied the room indeed, leaving me alone in the wreckage of family but alive. The station smelled of old coffee and warm paper. Fluorescents hummed. Night pooled in corners. I sat at a metal table with a cup of water and a camera blinking above me. I gave them the sequence in plain boards. The call after a year of silence. The mansion polished. Linda's pot roast on bone china. Questions about retirement and control. Heat rising too fast after 2 drinks. A message telling me to stand up and leave. The back door, the gate, the ride, the anonymous voice. The turn on the bridge, officers under trees. The return, the knock. Detective Whitaker listened pencil steady. When I described the dust spinning in my glass, the muscle in his jaw moved once. He pushed the water nearer and told me to take my time. He wrote Maria's name, carefully underlined it once, and said they'd make sure she got home safe. The word safe made my lungs work again. They already had the evidence, boxed and numbered the untouched glass, the other bottles sealed papers from the study power of attorney with my son's name transfers for the restaurants, a letter to staff that sounded like me on a day I didn't recognize. People like their crimes to read well, he said, not smiling. Through reinforced glass, a row of holding cells sat like aquariums. Michael paced in one, wearing a path into concrete. Every few minutes, he rose to the window and searched for a door that wasn't there. For a moment, I saw the child who checked my face after a mistake. Then the man returned, jaw-set bargains forming behind his teeth. Sophia sat 2 cells down, smaller than she'd looked at dinner. Mascara had made dark tracks. Her hands were clasped so tight, the knuckles showed white. She stared at a fixed point. Maybe the future, maybe nothing. The detective explained the process. The liquid would travel on a chain of custody log to a lab. Prints from glass and paper would be lifted. Phones and laptops subpoenaed. Search histories scraped for orders and recipes no one should need. He listed charges: plainly attempted poisoning conspiracy, attempted grand larceny, elder abuse. He avoided sentences. Statutes and judges handle numbers, he said. My job is the record. He asked about bail without softening the question. The word lay heavy between us. I pictured my front door opening to urgency, my kitchen repurposed as a stage for explanations, the deadline pacing the room like weather. I told him I would not post it. The answer felt like setting down a bag I'd carried too long without checking who packed it. He nodded once and offered ordinary advice: call your lawyer in the morning. Eat something, even if it tastes like cardboard. Sleep if you can. I signed where he needed me to sign. My hand made the same loops it has always made. The C in Collins looked like a ladle Linda used to tease. I stared at that signature longer than necessary and tried to place it at the bottom of the study's papers. My mind refused to counterfeit me. I was grateful. Boots scuffed past the door. Printers coughed. A phone rang and settled. Time moved like a slow river. When they finished, a young officer walked me toward the lobby. The glass doors showed a town that hadn't noticed our collapse. A cruiser idled with its light bar dark. The air held the metallic chill reserved for hours when most people sleep. I turned back once. Through the glass, Michael had stopped pacing. He sat with elbows on his knees, head in his hands. A tenderness passed through me that hurt more than anger. I thought of the night he lay on my chest, new and outraged at air. I thought of years when easy yeses taught him less than a difficult no would have. Regret is quiet and thorough. It occupies any room you offer. My phone buzzed. Messages stacked like receipts, unknown numbers. I now recognized managers confirming locks and deposits my attorney's night address, answering received holding. Beneath them, a single text from the number that told me to leave. Are you safe? Under the humming lights, I typed yes. Then after a breath that measured more than minutes, thank you. The officer asked if I wanted a ride. I said yes. The squad car smelled of vinyl and damp wool. Queens slid past in reflective panes and sodium pools. We passed the bakery that opens before dawn, the deli whose window light is always on a church bell counting the hour. Ordinary life continued. He waited at the curb until I had my key in the lock. Inside the house greeted me with honest sounds, old wood, a steady refrigerator, a pipe that ticks when the heat cycles off. I stood in the dark kitchen and let the quiet lay over me like a blanket. On the fridge, tired magnets held photographs that insist time can be stopped if you press hard enough. I set my keys down and felt the weight leave my palm. Before bed, I wrote 3 lines on the pad by the phone the way Linda taught me when a morning must arrive with purpose. Call lawyer at 9. Meet managers at noon. Ask after Maria. I capped the pen and rested my hand over the words as if to warm them. A truck hissed down the block. Somewhere above, someone laughed. I switched off the kitchen light. The dark felt like a room with the door closed and the window cracked containment with a little air. Upstairs, I left Linda's photo face up on the dresser. Tell the truth, she would have said, and I had. It emptied one room and, to my surprise, began to fill another. I lay down in the bed that still remembers the shape of us and let the house do its small, loyal work, holding what remains until morning. Morning came slowly. I had not truly slept, only drifted in and out, waking at every creak of the house, at every groan of pipes. The bed felt cavernous without Linda, but that was nothing new. What was new was the silence of my phone. No messages from Michael, none from Sophia. Only the echo of the night before, replaying itself each time I shut my eyes. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted burned. Sunlight crept in through blinds I had forgotten to dust. The refrigerator hummed its magnets, still holding snapshots of better years. I stared at one of them, Michael at 10, holding up a baseball glove, sweat on his brow, pride in his grin. For a moment, I thought of tearing it down. My hand even reached for it, but I couldn't. It wasn't just a picture of him. It was a picture of who he used to be, who I had believed he could remain. I let it stay, though it hurt to look. The anonymous number weighed heavy in my phone, the lifeline I had clung to. They had saved me. Whoever they were, I owed them more than I could repay. I dialed half, expecting no answer, but the line clicked, and a voice no longer disguised came through. "Mr. Collins," she said softly. "It's Maria." The name fit like a puzzle piece. I had suspected. Her trembling hands, her careful silence, the way she avoided my eyes, yet somehow spoke volumes. "Maria," I breathed. "It was you." "I couldn't let them hurt you," she said. Her voice carried exhaustion but also resolve. "I heard everything when I cleaned the study. They spoke in front of me like I was furniture. They didn't care that I understood. They believed I would keep quiet because that's what people like me are supposed to do. Invisible, replaceable. But I couldn't." I sat straighter, the coffee forgotten. "You risked everything. Your job maybe more." "I risked nothing compared to what you did for me," she replied. "You always looked me in the eye when you spoke. You said thank you when I brought you water. They never did. To them, I was a shadow. To you, I was a person. That was enough." Her words broke something in me. I pressed a hand against my chest, holding back the ache. "Maria, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to. Just be safe. That's enough." But safety was not enough. Gratitude demanded more. Linda's voice rang in my mind, reminding me that the best employees, the best people, were those who did the right thing when no one was watching. Maria had done exactly that. "Maria," I said, steady now. "Do you have work lined up?" A pause. "No, sir. After last night, I doubt they'll give me a reference." "Then let me offer you something," I said. "I own restaurants, 7 of them. My newest location in Crown Heights needs a manager, someone trustworthy, someone with judgment. The job pays $60,000 a year to start. Health benefits, profit sharing after a year. Full training. It's yours if you'll take it." Her breath caught audibly. "Sir, you don't have to. This isn't charity," I interrupted. "I need someone like you, someone who can see what others miss, someone brave enough to act. Last night you saved me. Today I'd like to give you something in return." On the other end, she was crying softly. Not the tears of despair I had heard from Sophia, but tears of release. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll start Monday at 10, I told her. "I'll be there to show you around myself." Silence stretched. Then she whispered, "I'll be there." When I hung up, the kitchen felt brighter, the coffee less bitter. Gratitude has a way of softening walls. I wrote her name on my calendar in bold letters, Maria, 10 Savrut a.m. Monday, new beginning. The day unfolded in meetings. My attorney called back, voice clipped but reassuring. He confirmed freezes on all accounts, notices filed, staff briefed. My managers reported no unusual activity at any location. Customers still walked in, ordered their sandwiches, their coffees, their pastries. The business lived on, untouched by betrayal. By evening, fatigue settled, but it was different from the exhaustion of grief. This was the heaviness that follows survival. I sat in my armchair, the one Linda had insisted on for my back, and let the quiet wash over me. The house was still lonely. but no longer cavernous. Maria's courage filled some of the hollow spaces. It reminded me that goodness exists even where you least expect it. Family can betray you, but sometimes strangers step in to become something more. My phone buzzed once more, a message from Detective Whitaker. Both suspects formally charged. Trial date in August. Your testimony will be essential. I placed the phone down and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Because in the wreckage of family, I had found proof that honesty and loyalty still had a place in this world. And sometimes the truest family is chosen, not born. The trial date was marked on my calendar in black ink, but I refused to let it be the centerpiece of my days. What mattered wasn't the months ahead in court or the sentence a judge would decide. What mattered was surviving the night, keeping hold of what Linda and I had built, and finding a way forward in the wreckage of trust. The house felt different after Maria's call. Still quiet, yes, but no longer suffocating. The silence carried weight, but it wasn't hopeless. It was the silence of a room after music fades when you know another song might begin. I stood at the refrigerator one evening staring at the collage of photographs. My hand moved deliberately this time. I slid Michael's wedding picture from under its magnet and set it in a drawer. Not destroyed, not banished, just moved out of sight. Linda's photo remained where it had always been, smiling softly through time. That one I needed to see each day. That one reminded me that love could survive betrayal, that truth could rebuild from ashes. Maria's name stayed on the calendar, Monday at 10. I wrote another word beneath it, hope. When the day arrived, I drove to the Crown Heights location early. The streets bustled with the city's ordinary rhythm delivery trucks, unloading children darting past with backpacks, the smell of bagels and roasted beans drifting from shop fronts. Life moved forward. The restaurant was alive with morning chaos. Staff shouted orders, espresso machines hissed, registers chimed. I walked through the door and saw Maria waiting by the counter, her posture nervous, her hands folded. She wore a simple blouse and dark slacks clothes that carried humility, but her eyes held resolve. "Mr. Collins," she said softly, almost unsure. "Edward," I corrected gently. "You'll be working with me now. That makes us partners." Her lips trembled into a smile, and for a moment I saw how heavy her burden had been. Together, we walked through the back, past the shelves stacked with supplies, into the office where I kept ledgers and schedules. I explained the routine, the deliveries, the payroll, the schedules. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. Not once did her eyes drift away, as if she'd rather be elsewhere. When we finished, she looked around the office as though it were a cathedral. "I never thought anyone would trust me with something like this," she admitted. I thought of Linda then, of how she had always said the best employees weren't the ones with the perfect resume, but the ones who carried honesty in their bones. Maria was proof of that. "You've already earned it," I said simply. She blinked away tears and nodded. And just like that, a new chapter began. That night, back in my chair, I felt the house breathe easier. The dark corners no longer threatened, the silence no longer punished. Maria's courage had lit a candle in a room that had gone too long without flame. But grief has a way of circling back, even in the moments of renewal. Some nights, I sat at the table and let memories roll over me like tides. I remembered Michael as a boy running through sprinklers, his laugh cutting the summer air. I remembered his teenage years when he thought the world could be bent to his will, and how Linda always said he had a gambler's heart chasing thrills. I wondered if I had failed him somehow, if I had given him too much or not enough. But the detective's words echoed adults choose, and Michael had chosen. Again and again he had chosen lies, shortcuts, and diets. It wasn't my no that had destroyed him. It was his refusal to accept it. The court would do what it must. My part was simple: tell the truth, even when it empties the room. Weeks passed. The restaurants thrived, staff steady, customers loyal. Maria grew into her role, quickly handling problems with quiet strength. She earned the respect of my managers, the trust of the staff. I watched her confidence bloom, and in that, I found comfort. Out of betrayal had come a new beginning, not just for me, but for her. One evening, I poured a single glass of whiskey, not to numb, but to honor. I raised it toward Linda's photograph and whispered, "We made it through, my love." Not the way we hoped, but still standing. The liquid burned, but it felt honest. As summer pressed forward, I prepared for the trial. There would be testimonies, cross-examinations, attempts to twist the story, but I had no fear left. The truth was heavy enough to stand on its own. In quiet moments, I thought of what family meant. Blood is easy to claim, but loyalty is harder. Loyalty is in the housekeeper who risks her job to warn you. It is in the staff who keep the doors open when scandal threatens. It is in the memory of a wife who reminds you to choose honesty even when it breaks your heart. Blood betrayed me, but honesty saved me. As I close this chapter of my life, I carry that lesson like armor. Family isn't defined by last names or shared faces. It's defined by trust, by truth, by those who stand beside you when standing is dangerous. I may have lost a son to greed, but I gained a new ally in courage. And perhaps in that Linda was right after all. Families do find their way back, though not always in the form we expect. I turned off the kitchen light that night, the house warm with quiet. The calendar still held Maria's name, but now there were others, meetings, deliveries, staff, birthdays. Life filled the squares again. A new beginning written in ordinary ink lived in extraordinary ways. And as I climbed the stairs, I carried one final truth in my heart. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones we raised, but the ones who choose to stand with us, simply because it is right. As I sit here tonight, the house is quiet again, but it's not the same silence as before. It's lighter, freer. The truth has a way of cleansing even the darkest corners. I lost a son to greed, but I gained a reminder that loyalty and honesty matter more than blood. And I'll carry Linda's words with me for the rest of my days. Tell the truth even when it empties the room. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you reflect on your own life, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. Here we share stories of betrayal, resilience, and survival stories that remind us we are never as alone as we feel. Please leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. This is Edward Collins wishing you peace, strength, and honesty in your own journey. Until next time. Good night.